Tomato season brings the best and the most flavor in the fruit, so we need to use it to its full extent, and this tomato crostata is the perfect way. A delicious crust full of flavor with a few extra amazing additions. A filling, fresh tomatoes on top. We're gonna bake it and it's gonna look just like this, and you can make one too. Let's go. We're getting to the point where summer feels like it's winding down, but that's actually the best time for the ripe summer tomatoes. So I ran onto my garden, got in all the heirloom tomatoes, and this is why I love to make a tart, a crostata, a galette right now. And if you want to know, why do we use the term galette? Why do we use the term crostata? They're somewhat interchangeable. Crostata is more the Italian version of a rustic open tart. Galette is more the French version, but they can be used in the same form. So what we're making is a beautiful tomato crostata. It's rustic, it's easy, and we're gonna make the dough first. And I'm a proponent of knowing how to make a good dough. And this is pretty much what I use for my pies, with a few changes since it's gonna be savory here. So we're gonna start with flour, all-purpose flour, and I'm gonna make sure that I always measure it by overfilling and then swiping off so you don't pack it in. The one thing I think with any baked good we often forget is having too much flour can really change the recipe. So if you nicely and lightly put it in, it really makes a difference. So once our flour is in there, we're going to put in a little bit of seasoning, so some salt. You just need to season the dough, make sure it has some good flavor, a little bit of sugar, just like I would in my pie dough. I decreased it a little bit, but it helps brown it and also just helps balance everything out. Since this is going to be for a tomato crostata, we're gonna put some dried Italian seasoning. Now when I'm putting a seasoning, like an herb, in a dough, I like to do dried because I don't want it to burn. And then the one other change is some Parmesan cheese. So this is gonna add even more flavor. It's gonna also just have some beautiful kind of texture in there, and it's gonna be really good. So I'm mixing that together. And we just wanna mix to make sure everything's evenly getting combined and we don't have pockets. Now I wanna grab my butter. I keep it in the fridge because even though I have it cubed already, you wanna start with cold butter so it works in better. Our hands will warm it up, so keeping it in the fridge ahead of time and making sure it's cold is important. So I'm gonna put all those cubes in, and I first just like to toss them in that dry mixture to make sure they're somewhat evenly coated. I just find that easiest then to be able to not have bigger pieces. They're all about the same when we're starting. So now what I do, just like I would be doing pie crust, is you could do this with a pastry cutter. I find it easiest with your hands. You get a better touch, a feel, and these are the best tools you have in the kitchen. So I'm gonna pick up some flour and a piece of butter in between each thumb and forefinger, and then I push it. I just push it. See how it flattens it somewhat in irregular pieces? And I keep doing that motion of picking up a cube of butter and pushing it until we get a sandy texture that almost holds together like wet sand would. And you can tell by the end of doing this, I somewhat speed up and I just start, as they get smaller, pushing them through a lot quicker. Because what you're getting, you can see irregular pieces of butter, maybe some the size of a pea, a vegetable, you know, the peas we eat, or smaller. But then what I like to notice is, if you take up a clump of this and make a fist, see how it holds together, but it just instantly crumbles apart. That to me is perfect, and that's what I want. So if you want other versions of crostatas, galettes, you can check my website, wiseguy.com. I have a beautiful squash galette for fall. I have peach galettes with fruit and blueberry. So there's different types you can do. Now what I'm gonna do is add cold water. That is going to make sure this comes together as a dough. Now I have ice in the water, but you don't want ice in the dough. So I'm gonna use a little tablespoon measure. And guess what? This is the one thing in baking where humidity can affect how much water, the time of year, all those things can change it. So I start with a certain amount and then I adjust if I need to and add more. And I think while we all get scared of water or moisture in a pastry dough like this, I like to err on the side of a slightly more moist dough than a dry dough, because if it cracks easily when you're rolling it out, it's usually because, yeah, it's too dry. So what I'm doing is just tossing that moisture with it. And what I'm checking is, at first it looks really crumbly, but now when I can start holding together and it becomes a really nice dough, it's still flaking apart though pretty well. So what I can start doing is pushing this together. Now I don't want to knead it. I want to form it into just a cohesive kind of rough, shaggy ball. And you can kind of start just forming it into that nice ball. Then what I'll do is bring up, now oftentimes I'll use reusable wrap, but I want you to be able to see what I'm doing, and you can see through this clear wrap better. So what I'm doing is putting this on here. And if you have little dry bits still at this point, that's fine. Put them around it, and then just take the sides and start making sure it's forming together. This is so we don't over touch it, don't overheat it up, because you see those big pockets of butter, and that's what we want. What we're doing here is making a nice cohesive mass. This is, I find, pastry dough, pie dough, whatever you want to call it, it's like riding a bike. Once you get the hang of it, you never lose it. And you can come back and keep making them. And it's one of those things where you're not gonna make it every day. But once you've made it enough times, it starts coming together pretty easily. So what I do is I start forming it into a nice disc. And I do that because then when I roll it out, I like to make sure it's easier. So if I form that nice disc and have it be flat on both sides and just that nice rounded edge, look at those shards of butter you see. That's what I want. So I'm gonna put this in and let it chill so the butter doesn't get too soft. We'll roll it out, we'll get the tomatoes ready. We're almost there. The dough is chilling, which takes, 20, 30 minutes just to make sure it resets and chills. So let's get the tomatoes ready. One important step of cooking with tomatoes is to salt them beforehand. It seasons them, make sure it brings out that tomato flavor. Also can alleviate some extra juice, moisture that can be laden in them. So I'm taking, isn't that a beautiful, I went out to my garden and just picked whatever tomatoes I had. At my house, I grow mostly the heirloom tomatoes, and over at my mom's across the road, we grow the ones that we can with, which are usually more red ones, like Amish paste. So I'm just choosing all these gorgeous tomatoes, and what I'm gonna do is just nicely make sure we start cutting them in slices, and look at that beautiful interior of the tomato. And you can see it's slightly thick just because they are gonna get some baking. So we don't need them to be super thin. And what we're gonna do is take these tomatoes, once I'm slicing them, I love tomato season. And we wait all year for an actual good tasting tomato. Because the thing is, if you buy one out of season, it never tastes like a tomato. It tastes like nothing. So you wanna use them now. So I'm gonna obviously use a few tomatoes, but I wanna show you here. We're gonna just take a nice, I'm using kosher salt, and I'm lightly salting them. So what this will do, salt, anytime you put salt on something, it starts drawing out excess moisture. That's what it does. That's why we pre-salt things. That's why we marinate things. And then what it will do is also start seasoning them. So I'm gonna let that salt sit on them. I'm gonna keep getting some different colors. I wanna have a mixture of colors to do this because it just makes it prettier. And then we'll roll out the dough. We'll use these, make the filling. It's all done. The dough chilled, and now I've been rolling it out on a lightly floured surface. The one thing I think that is so important when you're rolling out a pastry dough like this, you want to keep it cold, obviously. I keep it moving. So every time I like to make a half kind of turn and then turn the dough. Roll, turn, roll, turn. And what that does is it keeps it in a little bit better of a circle. So you're not just going out, back, which gets long, and then you have to try to, you continually are just always turning it, which also makes sure it's not sticking. And you can kind of keep just working it out. And that to me has always been the easiest. Now, the second is don't guess. Don't guess how long it is. Now, if you know how big your rolling pin is, you can lay that on, use it as a measuring. You can also just use a measure and check. So I'm gonna put it onto just a lightly, just like a parchment lined baking sheet. I just fold it over, then fold it back open. So that is ready for us to go. And now we can talk about a quick filling on the bottom. So it's starting with cream cheese. Now, what I like about cream cheese is it has that tangy, sweet quality, which works really well with tomatoes. And I did make sure to have it softened, so you can see now I'm stirring it very easily. I'm gonna add a little bit, if you follow me, you know this is my favorite ingredient, a little Dijon mustard. I know some people don't like it, that's fine. But Dijon mustard, I think of it like a salt. It's a seasoning, it adds kind of a depth of flavor. It has this unique quality to be kind of tangy. I think it's a chameleon and can be so many things. So I'm stirring it in as that base note. And then what I'm gonna do is add some Gruyère cheese. So I have it shredded, and I've just been taking it and shredding it myself. One, I don't like pre-shredded cheeses. I don't like the texture they have because they usually have a powder on them. So Gruyère you can't usually get pre-shredded anyway. And now we're gonna put all this with it, and we're gonna put it in there. So you're gonna have, if you've ever had this cheese, you already know the amazing flavor it has. It's not just a one-note cheese. It has this beautiful quality to it, not a smokiness at all, but just this really unique beauty to it that I think works really well with tomatoes. And you can see other tomato tarts will sometimes use this cheese for that reason. So I'm mixing it in with that cream cheese to kind of create this unique paste. And then what we're gonna do is put it right on the tart. And we just want to quickly then put this on the actual pastry that we rolled out. So what we can do is if this is going to get warm, or if you feel like it is, or if you had to stop for a second, go do something else, you can actually just put this back in the fridge, that pastry at any time. Keep it chilled because you don't want it to tear when you're doing this. So that's why I'm kind of spreading this out a little bit at a time at first, and then I'll just spread it into an even layer. Since we did the work of making our pastry, believe me, it's worth it. Don't question that. You also just want to make sure you're not going to now be tearing it or anything like that. So I'm going to take an offset spatula and just make sure I spread this all out to an even layer before we put the actual tomatoes on. Once that's spread out, I like to take just a few basil leaves. You can see I just keep them right here. I don't like to work them into that bottom mixture, but I like to just put a few underneath before we put our tomatoes on, just so they can kind of kiss the tomatoes a little bit, be underneath, enhance it just a little, and we can add some fresh on top then too. So you can see as the tomatoes have sat, they're glossy. It's beautiful. If you look underneath them, you start seeing that you can't tell, but these are all wet, all the paper towel, but you can see it's starting to take out some of that extra liquid, but more so it's seasoning them so well. So this is where you can take a little bit of time if you want to, and just start placing things around in a beautiful, whatever you feel creative doing. You know, part of cooking and baking can be creative, and this is one of those times where we can really be creative. Now, what I will say, I always do, and you're gonna notice this, extra tomatoes. You need to do extra tomatoes because you never know how they're gonna fit on there perfectly. So to me, you do a few extra and then you can just play around and get them to fit where you want them to. So that's what I'm gonna be doing now, is just placing them, putting them where I think they were gonna look best, and then we'll wrap it up. You can overlap slightly and you can put a few smaller ones on top, but notice you want to always keep this border around. That's why we only put our filling out so far, because that's super important when you're doing this, because you need that size and that room. And I did cut one of the big ones in half just so they would fit better. But now we have our tomatoes on our beautiful crostata. So we want to just start folding up this over on itself. So this is that extra flap we have. We're folding it and then we crease every so often. See how we're creasing and bringing it up over those tomatoes and the filling? So see how it just perfectly falls. And this is why we call it rustic. It's free form. And I'm finishing it by just a quick egg wash. So you can just beat an egg with a little bit of water if you want to loosen it up. But what this does is give a nice, crisp and glossy exterior. And it also will help as a glue. If your seams don't seem to be holding, put a little bit of this in there and they'll hold much better, but you shouldn't need to. You can see now, this is all done. It's gorgeous. It's ready for its moment. So we're gonna put it right into the oven. We're gonna let it bake until this is beautiful and golden and crispy and flaky. Then we're gonna eat. The crostata baked, and you can see that what I let it do was just like a pie, I let it cool, because when it is molten, like just that really hot temperature out of the oven, it's gonna go everywhere. It's gonna burn your mouth. It's also just gonna, that cream cheese filling is just gonna be too soft. So you wanna let it cool down, and you can see how beautiful it is. You can see that those tomatoes, us making sure we salted them, pulled out some of the moisture when you wipe it off on the top, and then when you bake them, they just slightly almost caramelize and condense their flavors, which is what I want here. So what I'm gonna do is actually go ahead and just put it onto a cutting board. I think that's an easier way to cut it so I don't ruin a pan. And you can see how easily it moves. What I should also show you is this beautiful crust. Do you see that? Look how brown and golden that is. That's what you want to be well baked, is a good crust. So what we're gonna go ahead and do is just slice a piece. Oh, that looks good. And look how nicely it slices. I think that's what's super important too. And you can see our crust is just super flaky, because as I take it, look at those flakes. And I want that gorgeous golden brown color on the bottom. That's perfect. So what we have here is a perfect crostata. Now you may wonder, how do you serve it? This is how you serve it. It can be a side dish for a bigger meal. It can be a lunch with a salad, but it's also just something that I end up wanting only this, and maybe having a little bit of salad even on top, but this alone is delicious. And then you can just go in, that crust is perfectly, I mean, just perfectly baked and browned. There's two things competing for number one here. That crust is like out of this world. But then the tomatoes, beautiful, fresh flavor. Obviously they're softened from the oven, which just makes them almost sweeter. And when you're just enhanced with that filling of cream cheese and Gruyère, can I just tell you, this is my favorite way to enjoy tomatoes if you want to go one extra step than just eating them fresh from the garden with a little bit of salt. That alone is good. This is like extra credit, and it's totally worth it. So what do I hope you do with this recipe? I hope you share this video around. Helps me, but it helps other people see you can do this too. Anybody can do this. If I can do this, you don't have to be on a farm in Iowa like I am. You can make it too. Share the video around, check my website, wiseguy.com for this recipe. You can print it off there, also in the description of the video. And until next time, make something new, make something delicious, and share it with people. That will always help.